I never thought I'd be the kind of person to weaponize a tow truck. But when you live in Cascade Springs, Colorado, and deal with Patricia Fontaine from the HOA board, you learn to fight fire with fire. The storm warnings had been blaring on every news channel since Tuesday morning. I'm Zachary Young, and I'd lived in this cookie-cutter subdivision for 3 years, long enough to know that, when the weatherman predicts 18 inches of snow with winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, you don't mess around. By Wednesday afternoon, I'd stocked up on groceries, filled my generator with gas, and made sure my driveway was clear. My garage was my lifeline during storms like these since I worked as an emergency veterinarian at Rocky Mountain Animal Hospital, and being able to get my truck out quickly could mean the difference between saving or losing an animal's life. The snow started falling around 7 that evening, thick and heavy, the kind that stuck to everything it touched. I was sitting in my living room, watching the accumulation through my front window and sipping coffee when I heard a car door slam. Through the curtain of white, I could make out Patricia's silver Lexus SUV pulling up to my house. Not in front of my house, mind you, but directly across my garage door, blocking it completely. I stood up, coffee mug still in hand, staring in disbelief. Patricia was bundled up in her ridiculous fur-trimmed coat, the one she wore to every HOA meeting like she was attending a gala instead of discussing lawn maintenance violations. She was trudging through the already ankle-deep snow toward my front door. The doorbell rang 3 times in rapid succession, the way someone rings when they think their time is more valuable than yours. I opened the door to find Patricia standing there, her highlighted blonde hair somehow still perfectly styled despite the blizzard conditions. She was in her mid-40s, with that particular expression of perpetual dissatisfaction that seemed to be a requirement for HOA board presidents. "Zachary, I need to speak with you about your holiday decorations," she announced, not even bothering with a greeting. I blinked at her through the snow that was now blowing into my entryway. "Patricia, there's a blizzard happening right now, and you're blocking my garage." She waved her hand dismissively, snowflakes catching on her leather gloves. "This will only take a moment. Your inflatable snowman is 6 inches too tall according to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines. It creates visual pollution and sets a bad precedent for the neighborhood aesthetic." "My snowman is visual pollution," I repeated slowly, trying to process the absurdity. "Patricia, I need you to move your car. I'm on call tonight, and if I get an emergency, I need to be able to get out." "I'll only be a minute," she insisted, pushing past me into my house without invitation. "Now about the snowman. I'm going to need you to deflate it or replace it with an appropriately sized decoration by tomorrow morning, storm or no storm. The rules apply regardless of weather conditions." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper wouldn't help. "Patricia, your car is blocking my garage during a blizzard. I need you to move it now." She pulled out a measuring tape from her designer purse, actually producing a measuring tape like she'd planned this whole theatrical performance. "I brought this to show you exactly how much your decoration exceeds the permitted height. You see, if we let one person bend the rules, soon everyone will think they can just do whatever they want. That's how neighborhoods fall apart, Zachary." "Move your car," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Don't take that tone with me. As HOA president, I have the authority to conduct these inspections at any time I deem necessary. Patricia, there's a state of emergency declared. The governor issued a stay-at-home advisory. Normal rules don't apply right now, and even if they did, you can't block someone's garage." She pursed her lips, that infuriating expression she got when someone dared to challenge her authority. I think you're being dramatic. It's just a little snow. Now, are you going to address the violation or do I need to issue a formal fine? That's when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw it was the emergency line from the hospital. My stomach dropped. I have to take this, I told Patricia, answering before she could protest. This is Zachary. Zach, it's Monica, my colleague's voice came through, tight with stress. We've got a German Shepherd coming in, hit by a car on Highway 24. Internal bleeding, critical condition. The owner's bringing him in, but Dr. Reynolds is snowed in at home. You're closer. How fast can you get here? I looked out my window at Patricia's Lexus sitting squarely in front of my garage door. I've got a situation. Give me 10 minutes. The dog might not have 10 minutes, Zach. I'll make it work. I hung up and turned to Patricia. There's a dying dog that needs emergency surgery, and your car is preventing me from getting to the hospital. Move it. Now. She actually had the audacity to check her watch. Well, I suppose we can continue this discussion tomorrow, but I expect that snowman situation resolved, Zachary. I'm not joking about the fine. She finally turned to leave, taking her sweet time pulling her gloves back on, adjusting her scarf. I was practically vibrating with frustration as I followed her to the door. We both stepped outside into the storm, which had intensified significantly in just the few minutes she'd been inside. The wind was howling now, visibility down to maybe 20 feet. Patricia made her way to her Lexus, and I watched as she climbed in, started the engine, and then nothing. The engine turned over, but the car didn't move. She tried again. Still nothing. Through the falling snow, I could see her trying to reverse, then drive forward, wheels spinning uselessly. She was stuck. She rolled down her window, snowflakes immediately invading her car's interior. I seem to be having a bit of trouble, she called out, as if I couldn't see that for myself. I walked over, already knowing what I'd find. The snow had accumulated enough that her two-wheel drive luxury SUV, with its low-profile tires designed more for appearance than function, was completely stuck, and it was still blocking my garage. You need to get out and push while you give it gas, I said, though I knew it probably wouldn't work. The snow was coming down too fast, too thick. I'm not getting out in this weather to push, she said indignantly. I'll just call a tow truck. Good idea. And while you're at it, call one for yourself too, because you're blocking my garage and I have an emergency. I was already pulling out my phone, dialing Mountain Peak Towing, the company I'd used before when a delivery truck had blocked my driveway. You can't tow my car, Patricia sputtered. I'm the HOA president. You're illegally parked on my property, blocking my garage during an emergency. Yeah, I absolutely can. The line connected. Mountain Peak Towing. This is Zachary Young at 427 Evergreen Court in Cascade Springs. I need a car towed from my driveway immediately. It's blocking my garage and I have a medical emergency. The dispatcher, a guy named Chuck I'd spoken with before, recognized my voice. Hey, Doc Young. In this weather, we're swamped, but if it's truly an emergency, I can have Jake swing by. He's finishing up a call about 2 miles from you. 15 minutes, maybe 20 with the conditions. I'll pay double the normal rate, I said, watching Patricia's face turn an interesting shade of red through her car window. No need for that, Doc. Jake's daughter's rabbit is still alive because of you. He'll be there ASAP. I hung up and looked at Patricia. Tow truck will be here in 15 to 20 minutes. She climbed out of her car, having to push hard against the wind. This is harassment. I'll have you brought up on charges with the board. I'll fine you for every violation I can find. Your mailbox is 0.3 inches too far from the curb. Your grass was 2 centimeters too long back in July. And don't even get me started on the shade of paint you used on your shutters last spring. I used the exact shade specified in the community guidelines, I said calmly, though inside I was seething. Every minute we stood here arguing was another minute that dog got closer to dying. SW7047, Dovetail Gray, Sherwin-Williams, I have the receipt. We'll see about that. I'm going to review every single interaction you've had with this community, and I promise you'll regret this. My phone rang again. Monica. Zach, where are you? The dog just arrived. He's coding. 5 minutes, I promised, and hung up. I couldn't wait anymore. I ran to my garage, punched in the code for the side door, and went straight to where I kept my emergency bag and my backup medical kit. If I couldn't drive there, I'd have to have them talk me through stabilizing the dog over the phone until the tow truck arrived. But then I remembered Marcus Chen, my neighbor from 3 houses down, had a snowmobile. I'd seen him riding it last winter. I sprinted through the storm to his house, nearly wiping out twice on the already slippery sidewalk. I pounded on his door until he answered, looking startled to see anyone out in this weather. Marcus, I need to borrow your snowmobile. Emergency at the hospital and my garage is blocked. Marcus didn't even hesitate. Keys are in it, garage is unlocked. Bring it back whenever. You're a lifesaver. I was already running toward his garage. 3 minutes later, I was roaring down the snow-covered streets of Cascade Springs on Marcus's snowmobile, my emergency bag strapped to my back, praying I'd get there in time. The normally 15-minute drive took me 8 minutes of white-knuckle navigation through what was rapidly becoming a full-blown blizzard. The surgery took 3 hours. The German Shepherd, a beautiful 5-year-old named Apollo, had a ruptured spleen and significant internal bleeding. But we stabilized him, removed the damaged organ, and by the time I was closing him up, his vital signs were strong. His owner, a woman named Sarah who'd been crying in the waiting room the entire time, nearly collapsed with relief when I told her he was going to make it. "Thank you," she kept saying, over and over. "Thank you so much." By the time I finished the paperwork and post-op checks, it was nearly 11. The storm was still raging outside, maybe even worse than before. I called Marcus to let him know I'd return his snowmobile in the morning since visibility was now practically 0, and he told me not to worry about it. Then I called Mountain Peak Towing. "Doc Young," Jake's voice boomed through the phone. "I towed that Lexus for you." Lady was not happy. She screamed at me for 20 minutes about how this was illegal, how she'd sue everyone, how she was important. I told her the vehicle was illegally parked on private property during an emergency situation, and the owner had every right to have it towed. She threatened to have my business license revoked. I had to laugh despite my exhaustion. "Where'd you take it?" "Impound lot on Industrial Drive." "She's gonna have to wait until tomorrow to get it out since the office closes at 9 and it was past that when we finished processing it. And with this storm, we might not even open tomorrow depending on conditions." She kept demanding I call her a ride, but I'm not a taxi service. Last I saw, she was trudging toward Main Street. Don't know if she was planning to walk home or what. Patricia lived in Cascade Springs too, but on the opposite end of the development from me, probably a good 3 miles away. In this blizzard, that walk would be brutal, maybe even dangerous. A small, petty part of me felt satisfied with that image, but the larger, more decent part of me felt a tiny pang of guilt. Tiny. Very tiny. I borrowed Monica's truck to get home since she lived close enough to walk even in the storm. When I pulled onto Evergreen Court, my garage door was blessedly clear. I parked Monica's truck on the street with a note on the dash explaining the situation, got my own truck out of the garage, returned Monica's keys, and finally made it back home around midnight. The storm continued through the night. dumping what would eventually be measured as 22 inches of snow on Cascade Springs, with drifts in some areas reaching 4 feet. I fell asleep to the sound of wind howling against my windows, too exhausted to even think about the inevitable fallout from Patricia. The next morning arrived gray and cold but mercifully quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a winter wonderland that would have been beautiful if it wasn't such a massive pain to deal with. I was outside at 7, snow blowing my driveway, when I saw Patricia trudging up the street. She looked terrible. Her fancy coat was covered in snow and ice, her hair was a mess, and she was limping slightly. She must have made it home eventually last night, but it clearly hadn't been fun. When she saw me, her face contorted with pure rage. She changed direction, marching straight toward my house with the determination of someone who'd spent all night planning exactly what they were going to say. "You," she spat, stopping at the edge of my driveway. "You had my car towed during a blizzard." "You blocked my garage during a medical emergency," I replied calmly, not stopping my snow removal. "And you refused to move it." "I couldn't move it. It was stuck." "Right, because you parked illegally on my property in a 2-wheel drive vehicle during a blizzard warning, despite being told multiple times to move. That's not my problem, Patricia. That's yours." Her hands clenched into fists. "Do you have any idea what I went through last night? I had to walk 3 miles in a blizzard. I could have died. You could have moved your car when I first asked you to. You could have not parked blocking my garage in the first place. You could have taken the emergency seriously instead of harassing me about a snowman that's perfectly within regulation, by the way. I measured it this morning. It's exactly 5 feet tall, which is the maximum permitted height for inflatable decorations. That's not you." She sputtered, her face turning red despite the cold. "This isn't over. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting. I'm having you fined for every violation I can document. You'll be sorry you ever crossed me." "Looking forward to it," I said, and meant it. Because I'd spent some time before bed last night reviewing the HOA bylaws, and I'd found some very interesting clauses. She stormed off, nearly slipping twice on the snow-packed street, too angry to watch her footing properly. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening, giving everyone time to dig out from the storm. I spent the weekend preparing, printing out relevant sections of our bylaws, Colorado state laws regarding property rights and emergency access, and even getting a statement from the hospital about the emergency call I'd responded to. Tuesday arrived cold and clear. The meeting was held at the community center, a bland little building that smelled like old coffee and disappointment. About 30 residents showed up, which was unusually high attendance. Apparently, word had spread about the incident, and people were curious. Patricia sat at the front table with the other 2 board members. Gregory Walsh, a retired accountant who usually just nodded along with whatever Patricia said, and Denise Martinez, a woman in her 50s who I'd always thought seemed reasonable but never spoke up against Patricia's more ridiculous edicts. Patricia called the meeting to order with her gavel, which she hit against the table 3 times like she was a judge instead of the president of a homeowners association. "We're here to address a serious violation committed by Zachary Young. Mr. Young, would you like to explain why you had my vehicle illegally towed during a state of emergency?" I stood up, holding my folder of documents. "I'd be happy to." "You parked your vehicle blocking my garage door during a blizzard, refused to move it despite multiple requests, and prevented me from responding to a medical emergency. Under Colorado Revised Statute 13-21-111, I had the right to have any vehicle blocking my property towed at the owner's expense. Additionally, Section 8 of our HOA bylaws specifically states that no vehicle may be parked in a manner that blocks another resident's garage or driveway. Patricia's face was already turning red. I was conducting official HOA business, which doesn't give you the right to break state law or HOA regulations, I continued. Furthermore, you entered my home without permission after I explicitly told you that I had an emergency situation. The HOA bylaws Section 3, Paragraph 2 states that while board members have the right to inspect external property features during reasonable hours, they must have permission to enter a resident's home and must accommodate emergency situations. The decoration violation needed to be addressed immediately, Patricia insisted. During a blizzard, with a stay-at-home advisory in effect, I pulled out more papers. I have here the weather warnings that were issued starting Tuesday morning, a full day before you decided to show up at my house. Any reasonable person would have postponed a decoration inspection during such conditions. Additionally, the decoration in question was not in violation. I have measurements proving it meets all specifications outlined in Section 12, Paragraph 4. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see several people nodding. Gregory cleared his throat. Patricia, did you verify the measurements of the decoration before issuing a violation notice? Patricia's jaw tightened. It looked too tall. I was going to measure it when Mr. Young so rudely had my car towed. So you were planning to conduct an inspection during a blizzard based on your visual estimation, which turned out to be wrong. Denise spoke up, and there was an edge to her voice I hadn't heard before. Patricia, I've been meaning to bring this up with the board, but several residents have complained to me privately about excessive inspections and fines for violations that either don't exist or are so minor as to be meaningless. That's because people don't respect the rules, Patricia snapped. If we don't enforce every violation, the neighborhood will fall apart. There's enforcement, and then there's harassment, said Tom Henderson, one of the residents in the audience. He stood up, looking angry. She fined me $200 because my mailbox had a small dent in it. Not because it was falling apart or looked terrible, just because it had a tiny dent. It's a mailbox. They get dinged sometimes. And she tried to fine me because my Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white, added Jennifer Paulson from the back. I had warm white instead of cool white. Who even cares about that? More people started speaking up, sharing their own stories of Patricia's overzealous enforcement. I watched as the meeting devolved into what was essentially a referendum on Patricia's presidency. Gregory and Denise looked increasingly uncomfortable, occasionally trying to restore order but mostly just listening to the flood of complaints. Patricia kept trying to defend herself, but each explanation just made things worse. She insisted the rules were the rules, that she was just doing her job, that people needed to respect the standards of the community. But with each resident's story, it became clearer that Patricia had been using her position to impose her personal preferences on everyone else, wielding the HOA bylaws like a weapon. Finally, Denise held up her hand for quiet. I think we need to address the larger issue here. Patricia, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. Your enforcement has been excessive, unreasonable, and in the case of Mr. Young, actively harmful. You prevented a medical professional from responding to an emergency because you wanted to measure a lawn decoration during a blizzard. I second that, Gregory said quietly, and Patricia whipped around to stare at him in betrayal. You can't do this. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I've been president for 4 years. I've kept this neighborhood pristine. Property values have increased. Property values have increased across the entire region due to market conditions, Gregory said, pulling out his own papers. He was an accountant after all. Not because mailboxes are dent-free. Denise is right. This has gone too far. The vote was conducted right there, with residents raising their hands. It wasn't even close. 32 residents voted for the no-confidence motion. 3 voted against, including Patricia herself. She was removed as HOA president effective immediately, and Denise was voted in as interim president until proper elections could be held in the spring. Patricia gathered her things in furious silence, her hands shaking as she shoved papers into her bag. She looked at me once, eyes full of such venom that I actually took a step back. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You'll regret this." "I don't think I will," I replied honestly. She stormed out of the community center, leaving behind a room full of relieved residents. People actually clapped after she left, and several came up to thank me for standing up to her. "Someone needed to," Tom Henderson said, shaking my hand. "She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, but everyone was too afraid to push back." Denise approached me as the crowd was dispersing. "Zachary, I want to apologize. I should have spoken up sooner. I knew Patricia was getting out of hand, but I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that she meant well. Tonight made me realize I was wrong to stay silent." "I appreciate that," I said. "What made you finally decide to say something?" She smiled slightly. "I'm a nurse. When you explained that you were trying to respond to a medical emergency, and she was preventing you from doing so for something as trivial as a decoration measurement during a blizzard, I just couldn't stay quiet anymore. That's not about HOA rules or neighborhood standards. That's about basic human decency, and she crossed a line." Over the next few days, Cascade Springs felt different, lighter somehow. People were friendlier, less worried about whether their mailbox was positioned at exactly the right angle, or if their grass was precisely the approved length. Denise sent out an email to all residents announcing that the board would be reviewing all HOA regulations with an eye toward reasonableness, and would be implementing a common-sense approach to enforcement going forward. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. But I underestimated Patricia's need for revenge. 2 weeks after the board meeting, I came home from work to find a citation taped to my front door. It wasn't from the HOA this time. It was from the City of Cascade Springs Code Enforcement Office. According to the citation, my property had been reported for multiple violations, including improper drainage that was supposedly directing water onto city property, a fence that was allegedly 6 inches over the property line, and an unlicensed home business operation. None of it was true. My drainage was fine, my fence was exactly where it was supposed to be, and I didn't run any business out of my home. But someone had reported these violations, and now I had to deal with a city inspector coming out to verify everything. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Bill Kowalski, showed up on Saturday morning with a clipboard and a measuring tape. He spent 2 hours checking everything, and when he was done, he shook his head. "All of these complaints are bogus," he said. "Your drainage is code compliant, your fence is well within your property line, and there's no evidence of any business operation. Someone's wasting my time and yours." "Can you tell me who filed the complaint?" I asked, though I already knew. He consulted his clipboard. "A Patricia Fontaine. She filed 3 separate complaints in 1 week. Actually, looking at this, she's filed complaints about several properties in this neighborhood recently." "Is she always like this?" "She used to be the HOA president," I explained. "She was removed a couple weeks ago, and I think she's not taking it well." Bill sighed. "Great. Look, I'll mark all these as unfounded, and there's no citation or fine. But if she keeps filing false reports, she could be charged with misuse of city resources." That's a misdemeanor in Colorado. You might want to talk to her about that. I'll pass that information along to our current HOA president, I said. Thanks for checking everything out. I called Denise after Bill left and explained the situation. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she sighed. Zachary, there's something you should know. Patricia's been calling me daily, demanding to be reinstated. She's also been sending threatening emails to several residents who voted against her. Nothing explicitly illegal, but definitely harassing. I've been documenting everything, but I wasn't sure if it warranted getting authorities involved. Add this to your documentation, I said. If she's filing false reports with the city, that's crossing into actual criminal behavior. I'll talk to Gregory and see what the board wants to do. Maybe it's time to send her a cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney. That afternoon, I decided to check my security camera footage. I'd installed cameras around my property after a package theft incident the previous year, and they recorded motion-activated video to cloud storage. I hadn't thought to check them before, but something was nagging at me. What I found was disturbing. Over the past 2 weeks, Patricia had driven by my house 43 times. I knew it was 43 because I counted them. Sometimes she'd slow down, clearly looking at my property. Twice she'd actually stopped and taken photos. Once she'd walked up to my fence line with a measuring tape. This wasn't just someone who was angry about losing their position. This was obsessive behavior that was escalating. I downloaded all the footage and sent it to Denise, along with screenshots of the timestamps. Within an hour, my phone rang. It was Denise, and she sounded shaken. Zachary, this is stalking behavior. You need to file a police report. I was thinking about getting a restraining order, I admitted. But I wanted to talk to you first since it involves HOA business. The board met via emergency conference call 20 minutes ago after I sent them your footage. We're in agreement. Patricia's behavior has crossed the line from being a nuisance into genuine harassment. We're authorizing the HOA attorney to send a cease and desist letter, and we fully support you filing a police report and seeking a restraining order. We'll provide any documentation you need. I made an appointment with the Cascade Springs Police Department for Monday morning. The officer I spoke with, Detective Sarah Brennan, took the situation seriously. She reviewed all my documentation. The security footage, the false city reports, the emails Denise had forwarded to me that Patricia had sent to various residents. This is textbook harassment, Detective Brennan said. The false reports to the city are particularly concerning because that's a criminal offense. Combined with the frequency of her drive-bys and the pattern of escalating behavior, I think you have grounds for a restraining order. I'm also going to have a conversation with Miss Fontaine about the false reports. The temporary restraining order was granted that afternoon. Patricia was served with papers notifying her that she was required to stay at least 100 yards away from me, my property, and my workplace, and that she was to have no direct or indirect contact with me. I thought maybe that would be enough of a wake-up call. Instead, it seemed to push Patricia over an edge I hadn't known she was teetering on. 3 days after being served with the restraining order, I was at work when my phone started blowing up with notifications. Text messages from neighbors, missed calls from Denise, even a call from Marcus. I excused myself from the exam room where I'd been checking a cat's teeth and stepped into the hallway to call Denise back. Zachary, thank God. Patricia is at your house right now, and she's vandalizing your property. Multiple neighbors have called the police, but I wanted to let you know what's happening. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, vandalizing? She spray-painted your garage door and slashed your tires. She's screaming about how you ruined her life. The police are on their way, but I thought you'd want to know. I told my boss I had an emergency and drove home way faster than I should have. When I turned onto Evergreen Court, there were 2 police cruisers parked in front of my house, lights flashing. A crowd of neighbors stood at a safe distance, watching as officers handcuffed Patricia, who was still screaming. My garage door was covered in red spray paint, crude words I won't repeat spelled out in letters 2 feet tall. My truck sat in the driveway with all 4 tires slashed, and someone had keyed deep gouges into the paint along both sides. Patricia saw me pull up in my borrowed work vehicle, and her screaming intensified. "This is all your fault. You destroyed everything. I dedicated 4 years to this neighborhood and you ruined it. You and your stupid emergency and your stupid snowman." "Madam, you need to calm down," one of the officers said firmly, but Patricia was beyond reason. "I hope you're happy." She shrieked at me as they walked her toward the patrol car. "I hope you enjoy your perfect little life while mine falls apart." Detective Brennan was there too. She approached me with an apologetic expression. "Mr. Young, I'm sorry this happened." We were actually on our way to question her about the false reports when we got the call about the vandalism. "Multiple neighbors witnessed her damaging your property and violating the restraining order. She'll be charged with criminal mischief, violating a protection order, and filing false reports to city officials. Depending on the value of the damage, the criminal mischief charge could be a felony." I looked at my garage door and my truck, calculating mentally. The garage door will need to be replaced. That's probably $1,500. The truck damage, between 4 new tires and the paint repair, maybe $3,000 more. "Yeah, we're definitely over the felony threshold." She nodded, making notes. "We'll need you to get formal estimates for the report. Document everything. Take photos from multiple angles, and I'd recommend filing a civil suit for damages as well." The insurance claims adjuster came out the next day and assessed the damage at $4,800 total, which was actually lower than I'd feared. My homeowner's insurance would cover the garage door, and my auto insurance would handle the truck, minus deductibles. But the hassle of dealing with repairs, the stress of knowing someone had been that out of control on my property, that wasn't something insurance could fix. Patricia's arraignment was scheduled for the following week. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching as she stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, looking nothing like the perfectly coiffed HOA president who'd shown up at my door during a blizzard to measure my snowman. Her attorney, a public defender who looked overwhelmed, argued that Patricia was going through a mental health crisis and requested psychological evaluation before proceeding. The prosecutor countered that Patricia's actions showed clear premeditation and escalating dangerous behavior, requesting she be held without bail. The judge, an older woman named Judge Marcia Thornton, reviewed the case file with an expression that grew increasingly stern. "Miss Fontaine, you violated a restraining order to vandalize Mr. Young's property, causing significant damage. You also filed multiple false reports with city officials, wasting taxpayer resources. The pattern of behavior documented here is deeply concerning. However, I'm inclined to agree that a psychological evaluation is warranted. You'll remain in custody until that evaluation is complete. If you're found competent to stand trial, bail will be set at that time." Patricia's face crumpled and she started crying, but I felt no sympathy. She'd had so many opportunities to stop, to step back, to recognize that her behavior was out of control. Instead, she'd chosen to escalate at every turn. The psychological evaluation took 2 weeks. During that time, I got my truck repaired and my garage door replaced. The HOA board, under Denise's leadership, sent out a formal letter to all residents explaining the situation and assuring everyone that they were taking steps to prevent similar incidents in the future. They also announced they were revising the complaint and enforcement procedures to include more oversight and accountability. Patricia was ultimately found competent to stand trial and charged with felony criminal mischief, 3 counts of filing false reports, and violating a protection order. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. Patricia would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 2 years supervised probation, mandatory mental health counseling, community service, and full restitution for all damages she'd caused, including my truck and garage door. She also had to pay fines to the city for the false reports. The hearing where she accepted the plea deal was brief. Patricia stood before Judge Thornton, her voice barely audible as she agreed to the terms. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than the woman who'd stood on my porch insisting that a snowman was visual pollution. Judge Thornton addressed her directly. "Miss Fontaine, I want to be very clear about something. The position you held with your homeowners association gave you a certain amount of authority within your community. You abused that authority, and when you lost it, you engaged in criminal behavior against someone who had simply exercised their legal rights. This kind of vindictive escalation is unacceptable. If you violate any term of your probation, including the no-contact order that will remain in place, you will serve the maximum jail sentence allowed for these crimes. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia whispered. "Additionally, as part of your probation terms, you are prohibited from serving on any homeowners association board or in any similar community governance role for the duration of your probation, and for 5 years thereafter. You need to understand that leadership positions come with responsibilities, and you've demonstrated that you're not capable of handling that responsibility appropriately." I watched Patricia's shoulders slump at that pronouncement. In a way, that restriction probably hurt her more than the criminal charges. Being HOA president had been her identity, her source of power and purpose, and now that was gone for at least 7 years. The restitution check arrived 6 weeks later, covering all my deductibles and the insurance company's payout. I donated it to the animal shelter. The money felt tainted somehow, and I didn't want it sitting in my account. Spring came to Cascade Springs, melting the last remnants of that historic blizzard. My snowman had been deflated and stored away weeks ago, replaced by Easter decorations that were carefully sized to meet HOA specifications, though I doubted anyone would be measuring them anytime soon. The neighborhood felt different now. Denise had been officially elected as permanent HOA president, and under her leadership, the board had streamlined the bylaws, eliminating dozens of overly specific and unnecessary rules. The focus shifted from enforcement to community building, with the board organizing neighborhood events and actually talking to residents about concerns rather than just issuing citations. Tom Henderson and I became friends, bonding over our shared experiences with Patricia's reign of terror. He was the one who told me that Patricia had moved out of Cascade Springs entirely, relocating to an apartment in Denver where she wouldn't have to deal with HOA politics. "Good riddance," Tom said when he shared the news over beers at my place one Saturday. "Though I do feel a little bad for her. She clearly had some issues she was dealing with." "Having issues doesn't excuse behavior," I replied. "She had chances to stop to get help, to recognize she was going too far. She chose not to take them." "Fair point." "Hey, speaking of choices, are you planning to run for the board when the next election cycle comes around?" "You'd be good at it," I laughed, nearly choking on my beer. "Absolutely not. I've had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. I'm happy to be a regular resident who follows reasonable rules and doesn't make waves. Can't blame you for that. Apollo, the German shepherd I'd saved during the blizzard, made a full recovery. His owner Sarah brought him by the clinic for his follow-up appointments, and he'd bounce into the exam room like nothing had ever happened, all wagging tail and happy energy. Every time I saw him, I thought about that night, about Patricia blocking my garage and how differently things could have turned out. If I just accepted her presence at my door, let her do her ridiculous inspection while a dog died because I couldn't get to the hospital. If I'd backed down at the board meeting instead of standing up to her. If I'd ignored the escalating harassment instead of documenting it and involving the authorities. Any of those choices would have been easier in the short term but worse in the long run. Patricia needed consequences, needed someone to finally say no to her overreach. The fact that I ended up being that person wasn't something I'd planned or wanted, but I didn't regret it. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't comfortable or convenient. Sometimes it means having someone's car towed during a blizzard, standing up in front of your neighbors to call out unacceptable behavior, filing police reports, and following through with legal action. But the alternative is letting people like Patricia continue unchecked, making everyone's lives miserable in service of their own need for control. Marcus Chen stopped by one evening in late April, returning a borrowed ladder I'd lent him for gutter cleaning. We stood in my driveway chatting about nothing in particular when he brought up that night. I've been meaning to tell you, I think what you did was brave. Not the towing thing, though that was pretty badass. I mean standing up to Patricia at that board meeting. A lot of us complained about her privately, but nobody wanted to make waves. You made waves, and the whole neighborhood is better for it. I just wanted to get to work, I said honestly. The rest kind of spiraled from there. Sometimes that's how it goes. You don't set out to change things, but you hit a point where you can't not say something. He paused, looking at my garage door, which was now pristine and spray paint-free. You know what's funny? I don't think Patricia ever understood that she brought it all on herself. In her mind, she was the victim, you were the villain, and everything that happened to her was unfair. Some people never figure that out, I agreed. They go through life blaming everyone else for the consequences of their own actions. Well, thanks for taking one for the team. And thanks for letting me be a small part of the story. My snowmobile has never been used for a more important purpose than getting you to that hospital. I grinned. Apollo thanks you too. I'll bring him by sometime so you can meet the dog your snowmobile helped save. After Marcus left, I stood in my driveway for a while, looking at my house, my properly sized decorations, my unblocked garage. The evening was cool and pleasant, the kind of spring evening that makes you remember why you chose to live in Colorado in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from Denise. Board meeting next Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, just budget review. You should come. Voice your opinion on how we spend community funds. I texted back that I'd be there, surprising myself a little. Maybe I was more invested in the community than I thought. Or maybe I just wanted to make sure we never ended up with another Patricia. The next board meeting was indeed uneventful, focused on boring but necessary topics like reserve funds and landscape maintenance contracts. About 15 residents attended, a normal turnout now that people weren't terrified of being ambushed with violation notices. The whole thing lasted an hour, everyone was respectful, and decisions were made through actual discussion rather than dictatorial decree. This was what an HOA was supposed to be. Neighbors working together to maintain common areas and shared concerns, not a power-tripping nightmare of petty enforcement and arbitrary rules. As I drove home that night, I passed the spot on Main Street where Patricia's car had been stuck during the blizzard. New businesses had opened in the storefronts nearby, a coffee shop and a bookstore, signs of Cascade Springs growing and changing. Life moved forward, with or without Patricia Fontaine and her measuring tape. I thought about that moment when I'd called the tow truck, knowing it would escalate everything but also knowing it was necessary. If I could go back, would I do it again? Absolutely. Without hesitation. Because sometimes the right choice is also the hard choice, and you don't get to avoid making it just because it's uncomfortable. Apollo was alive because I'd made that call. The neighborhood was better because I hadn't backed down. And Patricia, despite currently hating me with the fire of 1,000 suns, was getting mental health treatment she clearly needed. Summer arrived, and with it came the annual Cascade Springs Community Picnic, an event that had been dormant during Patricia's presidency, because she deemed it too chaotic and difficult to regulate. Denise revived it, and the entire neighborhood turned out for an afternoon of grilling, games, and actual neighborly interaction. I brought potato salad and ended up playing cornhole with Tom Henderson and a few other neighbors. Sarah came with Apollo, who was now the neighborhood celebrity, the dog who'd survived because of that dramatic blizzard night rescue. Kids played in the park, adults chatted and laughed, and for a few hours, Cascade Springs felt less like a collection of houses governed by bylaws and more like an actual community. "You know what I don't miss?" Jennifer Paulson said, walking up with a plate of cookies. "Being afraid to enjoy my own home. I used to stress every time I put up decorations or planted flowers, wondering if Patricia would find something wrong with it. Now I just do what I want within reason and it's fine." "That's how it should be," Denise said, joining our conversation. HOAs exist to maintain property values and manage shared spaces, not to micromanage every aspect of residents' lives. I still can't believe some of the stuff Patricia tried to enforce. "Remember when she tried to ban certain dog breeds?" Tom added. "Said pit bulls and Rottweilers were aesthetically threatening. Or when she wanted to require all front doors be painted approved shades of neutral colors only," I contributed. "No reds, no blues, nothing with personality." We all laughed, but there was an edge of relief to it. We'd collectively dodged a bullet when Patricia was removed from power. Who knows how much worse it could have gotten if she'd been allowed to continue. As the sun set and families started packing up to head home, I found myself talking with Denise about the future of the community. She had ideas, good ones, about improving the playground equipment and creating a community garden space. Things that actually benefited residents rather than restricting them. "I wanted to thank you again," she said as we helped stack folding chairs, "for speaking up at that meeting. I should have done it months earlier, but I was too much of a coward. You weren't, and it made all the difference. I don't know if not wanting your car towed qualifies as bravery," I joked. "It wasn't about the car. It was about being willing to stand up and say enough is enough, even knowing there'd be consequences. That takes guts." She paused, then added quietly, "I heard Patricia's doing better, actually. The counseling is helping. Her attorney mentioned it when we finalized the restitution payments. She's apparently starting to understand how unhealthy her behavior had become." "That's good," I said, and meant it. I didn't wish Patricia continued misery. I just wanted her to stay away from me and stop making other people's lives difficult. "Do you think she'll ever come back to Cascade Springs?" Denise asked. "I doubt it. Too many bad memories, too much embarrassment. She'd have to face everyone who voted against her, everyone who witnessed her breakdown. That's probably more than she can handle." I secured the last chair onto the storage cart. But even if she does come back eventually, she can't serve on the board and everyone knows what happened. She won't have that kind of power again. Good. Once was more than enough. Months passed, turning into a year, then another. The restraining order remained in place, and I never saw or heard from Patricia again. According to neighborhood gossip, she'd gotten a job in Denver doing administrative work for a property management company, ironically enough. Apparently, she was good at her job and kept to herself, no longer trying to control every detail of her surroundings. I continued working at Rocky Mountain Animal Hospital, saving animals, and occasionally dealing with genuine emergencies that required me to get out of my house quickly. My garage remained blessedly unblocked. I decorated for holidays using appropriately sized decorations. I mowed my lawn to a reasonable length. I lived my life without constant worry that the HOA president would show up with a citation for some imaginary violation. Tom Henderson became one of my best friends, and we made a tradition of having a Patricia Memorial Barbecue every year on the anniversary of that blizzard, inviting neighbors over to celebrate reasonable governance and unblocked garages. It became one of the most popular events in Cascade Springs, which Patricia would have absolutely hated. Apollo lived a long, happy life, eventually passing peacefully at the age of 12. Sarah sent me a beautiful thank you note after he died, saying that every extra year she got with him was a gift I'd given her by refusing to let Patricia's selfishness prevent me from doing my job that night. The snowman that started it all became a neighborhood legend. Every winter, I'd put up the exact same inflatable decoration, and every year someone would joke about whether it was precisely 5 feet tall. It became a symbol of sorts, a reminder that standing up to unreasonable authority figures was not only acceptable but necessary. Cascade Springs thrived under Denise's leadership, and subsequent presidents who followed her example of reasonable, community-focused governance. Property values did increase, not because mailboxes were dent-free and decorations were color-coordinated, but because people actually wanted to live in a neighborhood where they felt respected and welcomed rather than constantly monitored and criticized. I never did run for the HOA board, despite periodic attempts to draft me. I'd had my fill of HOA politics and was content to be a regular resident who showed up to meetings occasionally and voted on important issues. Some people are meant to lead, and some people are meant to just live their lives peacefully, and I fell firmly into the latter category. The only time I seriously considered getting involved was when someone proposed naming the community center meeting room after Patricia as a reminder of how not to govern. I voted against it, not out of sympathy for Patricia, but because I thought we should focus on moving forward rather than memorializing our mistakes. The proposal failed anyway, and the room remained simply Meeting Room A, boring and functional and perfect. Looking back on everything that happened, the thing that strikes me most is how easily it could have been avoided. If Patricia had just listened the first time I asked her to move her car, if she'd shown a basic level of respect for emergency situations, if she'd been willing to prioritize a dying animal over measuring a lawn decoration, none of it would have happened. She'd still be HOA president, probably still making people's lives difficult, but I wouldn't have had to call a tow truck and set off the chain of events that ultimately led to her arrest and removal. But she didn't listen, couldn't listen, because somewhere along the way, she decided that being right about HOA bylaws was more important than being decent to her neighbors. That need for control and authority had consumed her to the point where common sense and basic humanity no longer factored into her decisions. The lesson, if there is one, isn't really about HOAs or blocked garages or tow trucks. It's about what happens when people get a little bit of power and let it define them completely. Patricia had built her entire identity around being HOA president, around being the person who enforced the rules and maintained standards. When that identity was threatened, she couldn't handle it, couldn't step back and recognize that she'd gone too far. I feel sorry for her in a way. Not sorry enough to regret my actions, but sorry that she wasted so much of her life being miserable and making others miserable in pursuit of perfectly aligned mailboxes and appropriately sized lawn decorations. What a hollow, sad existence that must have been. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in my backyard on a warm Colorado evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple, my garage door unblocked and my truck tires unslashed, living proof that sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing, and that's okay. Apollo's collar hangs in my office at work, a reminder of the dog who lived because I made a difficult call on a snowy night years ago. The inflatable snowman is packed away in my garage, waiting for next December, when I'll inflate it again to its precisely measured 5 feet of height. And when I do, I'll remember Patricia showing up at my door with her measuring tape and her fur-trimmed coat, so certain she was right, so convinced that her authority meant something in the face of a blizzard and a medical emergency. She was wrong, spectacularly and completely wrong, and sometimes being proven wrong is the most important thing that can happen to a person, even if they never quite realize it. The neighborhood is better for it. Apollo lived because of it, and I learned that standing up to bullies with clipboards is just as important as standing up to any other kind. That's the real story behind the blocked garage and the tow truck and the HOA president who couldn't get home for hours. It's not about revenge or getting even. It's about boundaries and consequences, and the simple fact that no amount of authority gives someone the right to endanger others in pursuit of petty grievances. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing everything that would follow, I'd still make the same call to Mountain Peak Towing, still have that Lexus removed from my driveway, still stand up at that board meeting and present my evidence. Because some battles are worth fighting, even when they start with something as simple as needing to get your truck out of the garage during a snowstorm. Cascade Springs is home now, really home, in a way it never quite was when Patricia was president. My neighbors are friends. The HOA is functional without being oppressive, and I can put up holiday decorations without wondering if someone's going to show up with a measuring tape. And my garage, it stays beautifully, perfectly, gloriously unblocked.